Hello and welcome to Over the Target. I'm Lee Smith. Thank you so much for joining us today. We have a terrific show. I'm just speaking with a friend, colleague, the editor of the new Criterion. Is a fantastic writer. You've seen his opinion columns. You've seen him write about politics. Some of you may not know, though, he is a superb cultural critic, an art critic, and he has a fantastic essay in a new book, which he published as Encounter, as publisher of Encounter Books. And here it is. It's Up from Conservatism. I'm holding up the galleys here. Up from Conservatism, Revitalizing the Right After a Generation of Decay. And this is published by Encounter Books. And the publisher there is Mr. Roger Kimball. Roger, thank you so much for joining us here today on Over the Target.
Lee, it's great to be with you.
Thank you. So look, you have a fantastic essay here. I'm going to hold this up too. What the right gets wrong about art. There it is. And we're going to talk some about this essay. But so, yeah, a lot of people do not know. I mean, I first knew you, I believe, or I first started reading you as someone who wrote on art and someone who wrote on culture. Now, of course, you write frequently, you write regularly for American Greatness and other publications about politics.
And the Epic Times.
Yeah, that's right. Of the Epic Times as well. Right. Thank you for pointing that out. But is art and culture really where you come from? Are those the first things that you started writing about?
Yes, that's true. I mean, my background is in philosophy and classics, but my first publication was about philosophy, but then after that, it was really about art and literature. So I've written a lot about that.
So the title of the essay, "What the Right Gets Wrong About Art," it touches on that, but it touches on a lot of other things as well, which I want to get to. Your ideas of beauty, and your ideas of aesthetics. But I mean, one of the things that you say in here, when I think there's broad agreement that a lot of people on the right aren't really interested in culture, while they will often quote Andrew Breitbart, say politics is downstream of culture.
Yes.
Still, a lot of people aren't very interested in it. Why not? I mean, we watch movies, we read books.
Right.
Why aren't they? Why is the right continuing to get this wrong?
Yeah, well, I think many people on the right, especially the old right, that this book is supposed to be a kind of antidote to, don't really think that culture is all that important. They might say that they do, and they're happy to write checks to their local museum and so on. But at the end of the day, I think they belong to that category of people that Irving Kristol, many years ago, in a talk he gave, I think it was for the American Enterprise Institute in a different incarnation of that institution, perhaps. He said, the important people who run our society really don't care about culture. They don't really care about universities, for example, because they don't think that culture is that important. That's what the left cares about. And what they should really say, these people, what they should really care about are important things like economics and foreign policy, that sort of thing. Now, those are definitely important things, but I think that Kristol was right. He said they should care about them because, as they will know when their children come home from college, having been essentially brainwashed, that culture really articulates a system of values that if you abandon it, then you wind up in the enemy's camp, and it's it affects everything, including economics. But I think that we, as a culture, there's one sense in which we do care about art. I mean, we do care about culture. Just think of the all of the perquisites we give to these institutions that are repositories for art. Universities and museums are tax-exempt entities. We build these great palaces to the past and so on, and yet there's a kind of worm in this biscuit, because like so many other things in our culture, we see in these institutions that were created to perpetuate, to preserve, and to perpetuate the highest values of our civilization, the university, let's say, museums, that they have somehow become inverted. They've turned into their opposite. So it'd be no surprise to your audience to hear that not only universities, but our entire educational establishment is involved not so much with the preservation and transmission of the highest values of our civilization, but in their destruction. And it's the same thing with the museums. There are a few exceptions, but they are exceptions. In so many cases, the people and the institutions we have entrusted to preserve what is highest have aligned themselves with what is lowest. So instead of championing beauty, let's say, they embrace the ugly, the degraded, the pornographic, the banal. Now, how can that be? How can how does that? What happens for that? What had to happen for that to take place? And I think that's a question that would occupy more than an essay, would occupy a book or several. But I think that we see these forces at work undermining our civilization. It's across the board. It's everything from family values to art to education to politics. I mean, how is it possible, for example, that we still pay lip service to something like limited government when we're living in a regime of unlimited government? Or we mouth the expressions with liberty and justice for all, when clearly we don't mean it, because we are living in a two-tier justice system where some people who don't have the right attitudes are actively discriminated against by our justice system. And it infects the realm of culture as well. And that's my essay was really an effort to say a few things about how the right has kind of given up on the fructifying forces of art, those elements of art that can help build up and articulate what is most noble, what is most worthy of emulation, what is most worthy of preserving and transmitting to future generations. There's always a danger, I think, to confuse the beautiful with the merely pretty. Rilke once says that beauty is only the beginning of a terror we can just barely endure, and we can do this because it disdains to destroy us. Well, that's a very different kind of idea of beauty from the merely pretty. Before we began our conversation, you mentioned an observation by Dostoevsky from the Brothers Karamazov, where he says that beauty is the battlefield where God and the devil war for the soul of man. Now think about that. That means that there's something inherently attractive about beauty, but it's not necessarily value neutral. It can lead us upward, but it can also lead us downward. And that dynamic, that dialectic is something that I think we need to pay more attention to in our society.
I want to come back to something because you've been talking about beauty, and that's what I wanted to talk about. And it's fantastic to hear you discuss this. But something that you said, something that you just said was about you were also talking about the perversion of language, and you were talking about the inversion of values. So in a sense, and in a sense, is it, look, when the right retreated, because it's very strange, right? Because we know that most of certainly American literary modernists, most of them were on the right, and some of them, like T.S. Eliot and Ezra Pound, had very dangerous and unpleasant ideas, right? But many of them were on the right. Those on the left were few and far between. Modernism was really, in a sense, a right-wing movement, a conservative movement, which in lots of ways makes sense. Um, but what we've seen is with the right, I think this is what you're saying, that the right has withdrawn from culture and from aesthetics. And it's not even so much that the left has taken all of this over. What's happened while the right has withdrawn is that the left has inverted values. They've turned beauty into ugliness. And we see this not just in museum shows, we see this not just in galleries throughout Chelsea or Los Angeles. We see it not just in bookstores. When we walk in, we see these disgusting novels, but we see it in our everyday life. We see what the aesthetics are now. Everything from the masking of COVID. Now people were proud of this aesthetic to the trans aesthetic. So I wonder what is the value of beauty at this point, and is there no defensive beauty if the ruling party has in fact inverted all of these different has inverted the idea of beauty and now instead promotes ugliness.
Yes, well, there's definitely that is definitely a prominent current in our culture. I mean, it's understandable why conservatives would throw up their hands and say, "Well, if this is what the art world is, I want no part of it." Now they're beginning to say, "Well, if this is what education, the educational establishment is, I want no part of it." You know, the spectacle of parents going to school boards to plead with teachers to take pornography and the trans activism out of the classroom, and have the school board meetings disrupted by policemen coming in and dragging out the parents. And there are similar things in the realm of culture. So the 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 question is, what is it about beauty that we can still celebrate? And I don't think I got into this so much in my essay, but I do believe that there are little oases of activity. They're apart from the limelight. You won't see them at the Museum of Modern Art or the Whitney Museum or the trendy galleries, but there's a very strong current of what you might call artistic rehabilitation going on in our culture. It's small as yet. It doesn't get reviewed in the New York Times or the other legacy media, but it is there. There are embers still. But I think one of our tasks is to give these embers the oxygen that they need to burst into flames and become something important in our culture. I think we've seen people. It's in the world of art, but also in education. In many of our institutions now, we see the beginnings of a sort of pushback, and I think it's incumbent upon people who care about the future of our culture to do everything they can to encourage those trends.
We talk about our constitutional republic and how our
Yes,
constitution was made for a moral people. So
yes,
and we believe that this is important to our constitutional republic. Is
right.
is beauty also important to our constitutional republic? What
Yeah,
role is
well,
art supposed to play?
yes, well, it's there's a because that line you just quoted comes from John Adams.
Hmm.
It says our Constitution was made for a moral and religious people. It won't work for any other. But he was also said it was also John Adams, I believe, said that he was engaged in statecraft in order that his son could be engaged in something like, let's say, engineering, in order that his grandson could and granddaughters
Uh,
could be engaged in art and philosophy.
you
So
quote that in the piece. It's beautiful. I was so happy to see that in the piece.
yeah,
If I
did
if
I?
I knew the line, I'd forgotten about it. It was so wonderful. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it is a good line. I think that our Constitution. I mean, are we still a constitutional republic? We'll talk about that on another podcast.
Yeah.
It's a
Right.
it's a good question. Benjamin Franklin said, some lady said, "Well, Dr. Franklin, what kind of government have you given us after the Constitutional Convention?" And he said, "A republic, madam, if you can keep it." And I think up in the air about whether we have been able to keep it. But as I say, that's a question for another day. But I do think that our Constitution was basically a document to protect people against the untrammeled, coercive power of the state. And we've had 250 years, more or less, of clever people trying to undermine those protections. So we find ourselves in a situation where the coercive power of the state is regularly deployed against, a pro-life activist or someone else who the regime disapproves of, who haven't committed any crime, but just they have a different attitude about COVID policy, let's say, or about transsexuality, an idea so bizarre that one wouldn't even know how to discuss it a couple of decades ago. I mean, it was, would be out of the annals of some kind of weird mythology, like Ovid's story about Tiresias, who would live part of his life as a man and part of his life as a woman,
and was punished for it. Yes, right.
Yeah.
So, Roger, we're just going to cut away for 1 second here, because some people are watching on Facebook and YouTube, and if you are, please, we're cutting away now to Epoch TV exclusively. So please make sure and make the jump. We're having a great conversation with Roger Kimball here, spanning everything from classical mythology to our Constitution, to the present day impoverishment of museums and galleries. And when we come back, I want to talk about how we recover not just our Constitution, but also how we recover our sense of beauty, and why we need beauty in the world, why our country, why Americans need beauty, where to find it, how to cultivate it. So make sure you make the jump. We'll see you in less than a minute. The center of corruption is the Department of Justice. Charles Grassley has been going after them, identifying how the FBI and DOJ withheld evidence from the American people, from Congress, for 6 years regarding Biden family corruption. Where is the rest of Congress?
Senator Grassley, and joined by Chairman Comer, who's on the House side, they wrote a letter basically to the FBI and said, we are aware of the existence of a form that contains allegations regarding a bribery scheme involving Joe Biden himself. Then it turns out, hey, the document's real. They got it. There were 17 phone calls that the source had recorded involving Joe Biden or Hunter Biden talking about the bribery scheme. The FBI redacted that information to the American people. This is the FBI we're talking about. This is corruption of the president we're talking about. It's you get the documents, you get the witnesses, you get them under oath, you move forward. You don't play on their terms, you play on your terms.